Evidently, the sneaker market is down tremendously since its peak in 2020 to 2021, just like nearly every other market. Today, we'll be discussing when the sneaker market will actually recover and why, and what will occur before this recovery begins to take place. To preface this, it is imperative that you understand why the market peaked in 2020 to 2021. Furthermore, it is also important to note that the market has not completely crashed yet. Rather, the market has gone through a correction, and this ties into precisely why the market peaked in 2020 to 2021. For those of you who have been watching the channel for at least a year, you likely saw my video on the sneaker market crash. In this video, I explained why at the time in January 2022, the sneaker market had not yet crashed, and rather, it was a misconception. More importantly, I mentioned what will cause the sneaker market to crash and even lead to a recession. Well, only half a year later, and it seems things are beginning to play out as expected. Essentially, in that video, I explained that the sneaker market has not yet crashed. Rather, it has gone through a correction from the extremely inflated prices during 2020 to 2021. Those prices during that golden age of reselling were not natural and certainly not sustainable. So, how the f did it happen in the first place? In that video, I discussed a few variables, but by far the most important variable was the stimulus checks and overall government spending. And this is precisely why inflation is the highest we have seen since 1981. While yes, supply chain issues had an impact on inflation as well, the exponential increase in artificial demand is mostly to blame here. Evidently, if the consumer has more disposable income, demand increases. All the meanwhile, supply has either stayed the same or even decreased due to supply chain issues in the same markets. As you resellers should know best, what happens when demand increases and supply decreases, or even remains the same? Prices then increase. This insane amount of government stimulus has led to a severe influx in disposable income. The sneaker market is no exception to this artificial influx in disposable income, of course. That's precisely why we witnessed the absurd ROIs on sneakers that would have never seen such ROIs pre-2020, such as 2019, 18, 17, etc. The prices we see in the sneaker market now are very reminiscent to those in 2019 and earlier, but nowhere near the prices witnessed in 2020 and 2021. Clearly, the market has gone through a correction. If you're a sneaker reseller who joined in 2020 to 2021, these prices seem completely foreign to you. You have never experienced a market like this. Meanwhile, veteran resellers recognize that it was actually 2020 and 2021 that were the outlier years. Now that this is clarified, I'm sure you guys want to know when the sneaker market will recover. Well, we'll get to this soon, but first, I have some bad news for you guys. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, things are going to get worse. I'll explain why shortly. However, there is a benefit to this, at least. The benefit to this that I believe we will also experience, I'll term the Great Timmy Filtration. The reselling game is much more saturated now than it was prior to 2020. It was those absurd inflated prices in 2020 to 2021 that attracted many inexperienced resellers, primarily from the wastelands of TikTok. This, combined with plenty of free time in quarantine, led to a severe influx of these inexperienced resellers, nonetheless still increasing competition. I don't believe many of these Timmies will survive this upcoming period of lunch money and subpar margins. That's not to say they'll go extinct completely, but a majority of them will certainly be filtered out during this period, leaving the game with less competition. So that is one benefit to this. Sophisticated resellers will survive and still profit during this period, albeit less than 2020 and 2021, but the impatient Timmies, depending on mom's credit card, will become an endangered species. Now, allow me to explain why I'm confident that things will likely get worse from this point. With the frightening level of inflation, obviously the Federal Reserve needs to take action for the mess that they created. Clearly, this inflation was not transitory, as Mr. Powell initially proposed. Even he has now admitted that inflation is indeed not transitory.
Transitory has different meanings to different people. To many, it carries a sense of short-lived. We tend to use it to mean that it won't leave a permanent mark in the form of higher inflation. I think it's it's probably a good time to retire that word and try to explain more clearly what we mean.
So what can they do? Well, to start, the Fed can't control supply to alleviate the issues. What they can control is demand. However, some members of the Senate seem to think that it is actually possible to control supply. Whether this is an attempt to preserve their reputation before elections or simply a lack of critical thinking skills, I'm not sure. That's up for you to decide. According to this senator, inflation was not caused by the lucrative monetary policy or even the hostile fiscal policy on oil and gas. No, she seems to think that the oil industry is solely at fault for price gouging.
With high prices. Because not only in Nevada, but across the country, we're seeing high food, housing, and gas prices, which really is creating a financial hardship for too many families. And I want to start with gas prices first. In Nevada, average price of gas is $5.60. In Las Vegas, about $5.60. In Reno, at $6 a gallon. And as gas prices rise across the country, oil and gas companies, we know, are making record profits, but are using that money to continue to consolidate their industry and pay for stock buybacks instead of investing in increased oil production.
So despite the hostile policies against oil and gas created by the recent administration, she still insists that these oil companies should invest in refineries and increase supply for the sake of the people. Instead, they're investing in stock buybacks, just like tech companies do. Oh, you mean acting in the interest of their own shareholders rather than acting like a charity? This isn't a fucking fairy tale movie. Wake the fuck up. Now, that Jerome may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but I do still almost feel bad for him. This senator and many others either have no idea what they're talking about, or more likely, they're trying to scapegoat other factors, such as oil companies, quote unquote, manipulating the market, or even the Russia-Ukraine crisis in order to preserve their reputations for re-elections.
There is a challenge in holding these oil companies accountable. Oil companies accountable. Oil companies accountable. Oil companies accountable.
So, in principle, we pay attention to anything that could affect the use of our tools and the need to use our tools. And I think with the future price of oil, the best thing you can probably do is look at oil futures, because futures in theory should be taking into account all of these factors, and that's what we do. But ultimately, the question for us is, do we raise or lower interest rates? We don't have tools that would address these practices that you're discussing. They're not really, of course, we understand them.
Well, do you have concerns that these oil companies are manipulating or controlling the prices that we have right now? Do you take that into consideration with the tools that you need to reduce inflation and reduce these costs?
Honestly, those are not judgments for us to make. The questions about industry structure and competition are really not. It's not our assignment.
Even the Biden administration issued a letter to the oil companies regarding the prices. What is it really, though? It's virtue signaling to make it look like they're attempting to make a difference in preparation for re-elections. And we see a similar thing occurring in California, where they're removing the tax on gas, which is only going to cause more inflation, which is obviously not going to help anybody. So look, I'm not political, so don't take it that way. I'm just trying to expose these smokescreens to make it obvious for you guys who might not see this deception taking place. The real problem is the hostile fiscal policies against oil. Look, I'm all for going green. I'm heavily invested in Tesla myself, but we are not prepared to go full green yet. Yet, our hostile fiscal policies have caused these oil companies to lose immense amounts of money over the years. Now, all of a sudden, we need them because of the shortage with the war. And they're essentially saying, hey, you guys told us to f*** off, so now we're not going to take a risk and reinvest in more production because you're just going to f*** us over again once this is all settled. In order to see past the smokescreens, you need to break things down into the most fundamental level. And it is here that you realize supply cannot be controlled. So what does this leave the Fed with? Controlling demand. In this case, rather than artificially increasing demand with stimulus, the Fed needs to do the contrary.
But ultimately, the question for us is, do we raise or lower interest rates?
Hence, the Fed needs to increase interest rates. They already started, but they're going to need to increase rates even further. What happens when you increase the interest rates? Borrowing money becomes more expensive. This in itself leads to lower demand, but more importantly, it creates a negative feedback loop in the economy. Companies begin to lay off workers. Those workers without jobs then spend less money. The reduced spending then leads to less net income for the companies. Then they need to lay off even more people. Now, this alone is bad enough for the economy, but wait, it gets worse. And this is precisely what I predicted in my January sneaker market crash video. 2020 to 2021 was an overly inflated market. Hence, I do not feel there was any crash, rather just the market returning back to normal. As mentioned at the start of this video, however, I do certainly believe a sneaker market crash can occur. And the cause of this is what may also end up provoking a minor recession in the economy. What exactly am I referring to? Over-ordering. With the surplus of goods spending in 2020 to 2021, many companies began ordering many more products and many more resources than they usually would to compensate for this major surplus in demand. However, that disproportional goods to service ratio can't last forever, so long as quarantine does not last forever, and obviously it did not. What does this mean? Well, it means that companies will now have too much product for the demand that they have, or I should say, lack of demand they have, since the demand is now beginning to return back to normal. When companies cannot sell all their product, of course, this is going to negatively impact their overall net income. And that's where things can get really, really scary really fast. If enough companies misjudged how long that surplus of demand will last for, we very well may be seeing a minor recession as a result of this. A company's inventory is managed in a reactive manner rather than a completely proactive manner. When demand artificially increased during 2020 and 2021, these companies increased inventory notably because they thought that this artificial demand would continue to last. Now, all while this inventory is coming in and stacking up, demand is decreasing. These companies are left holding the bag with extra inventory that they cannot sell as fast as they initially expected, leading to reduced margins. Ladies and gentlemen, we're heading into a recession. And this recession is precisely what we need in order to escape inflation. So yes, we actually need this to occur, even though unfortunately people are going to lose their jobs. This is unfortunately the only way out of this situation. You could think of this recession like rehab after a serious drug addiction. It's fun when you start taking the drug, but then it's a nightmare when you need to go through rehab. In this case, the stimulus was the drug and the recession is the rehab. So, what does this mean for the sneaker market? Well, in order to purchase luxury sneakers, one requires disposable income. Take a look at the savings levels currently. As you can see, there was an influx during a certain period. I'm sure you could spot it a little bit faster than Where's Waldo, and now we're suddenly nearing the '08 levels, and it's going to get worse from here. Evidently, with lower savings, this is lowering disposable income, thus meaning there's going to be lower spending on luxury goods such as sneakers. In other words, the market will get worse through this period. So Keith, does it get better? Yes. The reselling game will indeed get better. In fact, it will most likely get better before we're even completely out of the recession, although this could still take up to 12 to 16 months. Why? Remember, companies manage inventory in a reactive manner. Nike and Adidas will clearly see their sales drop and their margins decrease. Thus, their production will also proportionally decrease. So, during this recession, while demand is low, inventory will also eventually decrease, thus bringing back more profitable opportunities again in the sneaker market. Just like they reacted to the high demand in 2020 to 2021 by increasing production, they will react to the low demand in 2022 to 2023 by decreasing stock for 2023 onwards. This combined with lower competition from that great Timmy filtration that I mentioned leads to a better overall reselling market. And eventually, after this in several years, when the Fed can lower interest rates again, demand will also increase, and the market will surge even further, as it will now be a combination of both low supply and high demand. So yes, the market will recover, but first, we're going to experience some more pain. I believe this pain period can last another 12 to 16 months worst case, after things should begin to brighten up. And eventually, when the Fed lowers rates in a few years, the market will truly be beautiful again. So, are you up for the test? Will you, a sophisticated, determined reseller, survive the great Timmy filtration? Given that Timmys are not self-aware, you might not even know that you yourself are a Timmy.
Keith, I'm kind of poking fun at everyone anticipating the drop today, so I'm starting to think It's not today either. Why is he poking fun? Listen, let us see. This is like these again. These little Timmies with their you know, on their high horse,
So ask yourself, can you survive the Great Timmy Filtration? Anyway, that'll conclude it for today. You can feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed, or perhaps learn a thing or two. Subscribe and enable post notifications. This way you stay 100% updated on all these hyped releases. Also, be free to check out the links in the description below for reliable, fast, residential proxies. Furthermore, be free to follow Endurance's Twitter for updates on the next restock or key giveaways. And the same goes for Gargantua if you want to keep up with the progress or restocks. Last but not least, make sure to follow Keith Adam 10 and Personals for You so you guys stay updated and all urgent info like I was discussing today. With that though, I'll see you guys later. Have a fantastic rest of your day and be strong.